In the early 1600s, the Dutch introduced African Americans to Jamestown. The Dutch were in need of food, so they traded their cargo of African Americans for food. The African Americans were better workers than the other slaves or indentured servants because they were suitable for intense labor and not susceptible to European diseases. This sparked slave trade across all of the colonies. Great Britain sold around 650,000 African Americans before Great Britain prohibited slave trade. The Ku Klux Klan, or KKK, was a group that was extremely into white supremacy. The group flourished in the South and wanted to protect its white nationalism by threats of violence. They usually targeted African Americans set free and whites that were for giving African Americans equality. They also used violence to intimidate the African Americans from standing up for themselves. Because the African Americans were very good laborers, all of the colonies legalized slavery. They also made laws against runaway slaves and interracial marriage. Later on, the Jim Crow laws further separated African Americans and whites. The Jim Crow laws separated their races from public facilities, schools, trains, and buses. The slaves originally battled for equality by destroying crops or faking illnesses. They would overthrow their masters and join slave revolts. Another approach for equality was the Underground Railroad. This was composed of volunteers who would hide slaves traveling north to Canada. As time progressed, the abolitionist movement started showing their views on slaves through books and poems. When the American Revolution ended, African Americans began taking part in the general development of the country. When any African American stepped out from the crowd and showed that he or she could grasp a complex idea and express himself or herself well in writing or speech, stereotypes of African Americans began to weaken. During the Civil War, African Americans volunteered for military service. At the end of the Civil War, the African Americans began to contribute more and more to public society and play a more active role. The Emancipation Proclamation in 1863 freed African Americans in rebel states, and after the Civil War, the 13th Amendment emancipated all slaves everywhere. Freed blacks faced a problem of what to do now that they were granted their freedom. The Reconstruction was aimed at reorganizing the southern states after the Civil War, providing the means for readmitting them into the Union and defining the means by which whites and blacks could live together in a non-slave society. There have been many laws passed that helped the African American population gain equality amongst the white population. The biggest movement that occurred during the mid-1950s to late 1960s was the Civil Rights Movement. During this time, many laws were passed and ratified that gave equal rights to all people. The 14th and 15th Amendments guaranteed people the right to citizenship and right to vote regardless of race, but from the 1800s to the mid-1900s, the Jim Crow laws had all but taken these rights away from African Americans. However, during the Civil Rights Movement, these amendments were ratified. The civil rights that African Americans were granted included equal opportunity in employment, housing, education, right to vote, equal access to public facilities, and freedom from racial discrimination. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 outlawed discrimination in all places of public accommodation and allowed the Department of Justice to bring suit in order to achieve desegregation of public schools. The Voting Rights Act of 1965 outlawed voting qualifications, including literacy tests that whites had used to keep African Americans from voting. There have also been many court cases that have both hurt and helped the African Americans' journey to equality. In the case of Plessy versus Ferguson, Plessy, who had only one grandparent that was African American, did not consider himself African American, but Louisiana considered him an octoroon, or 1/8 African American. Plessy had been asked to sit in the segregated section of the train and had refused. He was arrested and sent to trial. The issue concerning this was whether the Louisiana law violated the Equal Protection Clause. In a 7-1 decision, the court said that the law did not violate either the 13th or 14th Amendments.
Please call the main office, Mr. Putnam.
This is an important case because it was a federal law that made everything separate but equal, but the full equality was not there. On the other hand, in the case of Brown versus Board of Education of Topeka, Linda Brown, an 8-year-old African-American girl, had been denied permission to go to an elementary school in Topeka, Kansas. Instead, they assigned her to a non-white school 21 blocks from her house. Her parents filed a lawsuit to force her to be admitted to the nearby but segregated school for whites. Unanimous 9-0 decision, Chief Justice Warren said segregation in public education is the denial of equal protection of the laws. To separate some children from others of similar age and qualifications solely because of their race generates a feeling of inferiority as to their status in the community that may affect their hearts and minds in a way unlikely ever to be undone. African Americans are considered equal in the United States. The government is not allowed to discriminate by race. Even though there are laws that say everyone is equal, it is still prevalent in our society. People are not as likely to admit they are racist, but many racist acts still occur. African Americans are more likely to be depicted as violent in the media, are more likely to be sent to prison, are more likely to be pulled over or investigated by police, and more likely to be unemployed. While America has made progress for the days when African Americans were enslaved or blatantly persecuted by the government, our country still has a long ways to go.